The Colorado River rushed violently against the rocks as Eliza Ferguson's life shattered in an instant. The wooden bridge beneath her feet gave way with a terrible crack, plunging her into the churning waters below. In that moment of terror, as the current dragged her downstream, she reached desperately for her wedding ring, the one thing that connected her to a husband who had never truly loved her. The golden band slipped from her finger, disappearing into the murky depths as quickly as her marriage had dissolved. Colorado Territory, 1872. The West was still wild, and Eliza had come to learn just how unforgiving it could be. 3 months earlier, she had arrived in the frontier town of Silver Creek with Thomas, her husband of 2 years. He'd convinced her to leave their comfortable life in Boston, painting grand pictures of fortune in the silver mines. What he hadn't told her was about the gambling debts that drove them west, or the whiskey that would consume him once they arrived. The morning of the bridge collapse, Thomas had left their small cabin before dawn, taking their horse and what little money remained. His note had been brief: "Found better prospects elsewhere, don't follow." Those cold words had sent her stumbling toward the river, tears blinding her as she crossed the rickety bridge that connected the mining settlement to town. Eliza fought against the current, her sodden dress threatening to pull her under. With a desperate lunge, she grabbed onto a low, hanging branch and dragged herself to shore, collapsing on the muddy bank, coughing and gasping. She was alive, but everything else was gone: her husband, their meager savings, and now even the symbol of their false union. "Madam, are you all right?" Eliza looked up through strands of wet hair plastered to her face to see a tall figure silhouetted against the morning sun. A man dismounted from his horse and approached cautiously. "The bridge collapsed," she managed between gasping breaths. "That old thing's been threatening to go for months." His voice was deep but gentle. As he knelt beside her, she could make out his features' sun-weathered skin, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of a clear summer sky. "Name's Quinn Westridge. Most folks just call me West." "Eliza Ferguson." She attempted to stand but stumbled, her legs still weak from the ordeal. Quinn caught her arm. "Easy there." His touch was firm but respectful. "Let's get you somewhere warm. My cabin's not far." Under normal circumstances, Eliza would never have considered going anywhere with a strange man, but these were hardly normal circumstances. Besides, there was something trustworthy in his steady gaze. "Thank you," she whispered, allowing him to help her onto his horse. Quinn's cabin was modest but well-built, situated on a rise overlooking the river. Inside, a fire crackled in a stone hearth, and the furnishings, though sparse, showed craftsmanship. He offered her a blanket and privacy to change into one of his shirts while her dress dried by the fire. "I'm afraid I'm quite the mess," Eliza said, emerging from behind the curtain that separated his sleeping area from the main room. His shirt hung nearly to her knees, and she'd wrapped the blanket around her waist like a skirt. "You look better than most who have tangled with that river," Quinn replied, pouring her a cup of hot coffee. "Many don't make it to shore." Eliza's hands trembled as she accepted the cup. "I've lost everything," she said quietly, the enormity of her situation finally settling over her. "My husband left this morning, took what little we had." Quinn didn't offer empty platitudes or unwanted advice. He simply nodded, giving her space to continue if she wished. "I was crossing to town to find work when the bridge gave way," she added. "My wedding ring, it slipped off in the current." Eliza wasn't sure why she mentioned the ring. After Thomas's betrayal, it should have meant nothing, yet its loss felt like the final severing of her past life. "I'm sorry to hear that," Quinn said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "About all of it." As her clothes dried, Quinn told her about himself, how he'd come west after the war, worked cattle drives up from Texas before settling in this valley to raise horses. He'd built the cabin himself, added a small stable for his prized horses, and occasionally guided hunting parties into the mountains. "It's a solitary life," he admitted, "but peaceful." By afternoon, Eliza's dress was dry enough to wear again, though somewhat worse for wear. Quinn offered to take her to town, but with no money and nowhere to stay, her prospects were bleak. "I can't impose," she began, but Quinn interrupted gently. Mrs. Ferguson, there's a small cabin about a quarter-mile downstream. It belonged to an old prospector who passed last winter. It needs some fixing up, but it's sturdy. You're welcome to use it until you get on your feet. His kindness nearly brought her to tears. Why would you help a stranger this way? Quinn smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. Out here, neighbors look after each other. Besides, I'm not offering charity. The town could use a schoolteacher. I noticed your books when I pulled you from the river. Shakespeare and mathematics aren't common reading for most folks around here. Eliza had indeed brought her small collection of books west, unable to part with them even when Thomas had insisted they take only necessities. They'd been in her satchel when the bridge collapsed, now likely scattered along the riverbed. I was a teacher back in Boston, she admitted. Well then, Quinn said, as if that settled everything. I'll speak with Mrs. Holloway at the general store. Her husband's on the town council. There's been talk of establishing a proper school now that more families are settling here. That evening, Quinn escorted Eliza to the prospector's cabin. It was indeed small, just one room with a stone fireplace, but the roof was sound and the walls solid. Quinn had clearly spent time preparing it, for a fire was already burning, the floor swept clean, and basic supplies laid in. It's not much, he said apologetically. It's more than I had this morning, Eliza replied, genuinely grateful. I don't know how I'll repay you. No need for that. Just teach those children well when the time comes. He tipped his hat and turned to leave but paused at the door. I'll check on you tomorrow. Lock the door behind me. Over the next week, Quinn proved as good as his word. He introduced Eliza to key townspeople, spoke on her behalf to the town council about establishing a school, and helped her repair the cabin's few deficiencies. Mrs. Holloway from the general store took an immediate liking to Eliza and offered her credit until she received her first payment as a teacher. Quinn Westridge vouching for you is good enough for me, the plump, cheerful woman said. That man's word is solid as the mountains. You've known him long. Eliza asked, curious about her benefactor. Going on 5 years now. Came here after riding with the Rangers down in Texas. Keeps to himself mostly, but there's not a more dependable soul in the territory. Lost his wife in childbirth before coming west. The baby too, I heard. This revelation gave Eliza a new perspective on Quinn's kindness. Perhaps he recognized something in her own loss, though hers was of a different nature. Each day, Eliza explored more of her new surroundings. Silver Creek was growing rapidly as the mines flourished, bringing a mix of rough miners, merchants, and increasingly, families seeking new beginnings. The town council agreed to convert an unused storehouse into a schoolhouse, and Eliza threw herself into preparations, grateful for the purpose it gave her. On Sundays, Quinn would often ride down to check on her, sometimes bringing fresh game or vegetables from his small garden. Their conversations flowed easily, and Eliza found herself looking forward to his visits, though she carefully maintained a proper distance. Her heart was too raw, her trust too shattered to consider anything beyond friendship. One evening, about a month after her arrival, a thunderstorm brought torrential rain to the valley. The river swelled dangerously, and Eliza watched anxiously from her window as the waters rose toward her cabin. A knock at her door revealed Quinn, rain-drenched and concerned. The river's rising fast, he said without preamble. This cabin's too close to the banks. You need to come with me until it passes. Eliza hastily gathered a few belongings, and they made their way through the downpour to Quinn's horse. The journey to his cabin was tense, the horse picking its way carefully through increasingly muddy terrain as thunder crashed overhead. By morning, the storm had passed, but the river had transformed into a raging torrent that cut a new path through the valley, partially undermining the foundation of Eliza's cabin. Quinn insisted she stay with him until it was safe to return, setting up a makeshift bed behind the curtain while he slept near the hearth. I can't keep imposing on you, Eliza protested. It's no imposition, Quinn replied simply. Besides, it gives me an excuse to have actual conversations. The horses are good listeners, but they don't have much to say in return. Despite her reservations, Eliza found herself enjoying their shared evenings. Quinn was well read for a frontiersman, and they would discuss books she remembered from her collection. Sometimes he would carve wood by the fire while she mended clothing or planned lessons for her future students. On the third day after the storm, when the river had begun to recede, Quinn rode out at dawn. He returned mid-afternoon with a determined expression and mud-splattered clothes. "Found something that belongs to you," he said, reaching into his pocket. Opening his palm, he revealed her wedding ring, tarnished but unmistakable. The river shifted its course, exposed a new sandbar, saw something glinting in the mud. Eliza stared at the ring, emotions warring within her. "How did you know it was mine?" "Had your initials inside. EMF, Eliza Marie Ferguson," a name she'd once been proud to change from Eliza Marie Collins. Quinn held the ring out to her. "You still deserve it," he said quietly. "Not because of what it represented before, but because some promises are worth keeping, even if others broke theirs." Eliza accepted the ring with trembling fingers but didn't put it on. Instead, she closed her hand around it tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, touched by his thoughtfulness yet uncertain what the ring meant to her now. That evening, Quinn helped Eliza assess the damage to her cabin. The foundation needed reinforcement, but the structure itself remained sound. As they worked side by side, clearing mud and debris, Eliza found herself studying Quinn when he wasn't looking, the careful precision of his movements, the quiet competence with which he approached each task. "Why did you really help me that first day?" she asked suddenly. "There must be dozens of unfortunate souls passing through. You can't rescue them all." Quinn continued working for a moment before answering. "I was down by the river that morning because it's where I go to remember my wife, Sarah. It was the anniversary of her passing." He glanced at Eliza. "When I saw you fighting that current, something just, I don't know, it felt like I was being given a chance to save someone when I couldn't save her." The honest vulnerability in his admission touched Eliza deeply. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you'd lost your wife. I'm so sorry." "It was 7 years ago now. The pain fades, but the missing doesn't." He straightened, brushing dirt from his hands. "When I found you, you were holding onto that branch like your life depended on it, which it did. But your eyes, they had the same look I had after Sarah died. Like you'd already lost something precious and weren't sure if surviving was worth the effort." Eliza couldn't deny the truth in his observation. "I thought I loved Thomas when we married," she admitted, "but I was young and naive. He was charming and promised a future that seemed exciting compared to my parents' rigid Boston household. And now," Quinn asked quietly, "now I know that real love isn't found in grand promises or pretty words. It's in actions, in showing up day after day." She looked directly at him. "In pulling strangers from rivers and finding their lost rings in the mud." Quinn's expression softened, but he maintained a respectful distance. "The cabin should be safe enough now, though I'd feel better if you stayed up at my place a while longer, just to be sure." Eliza nodded, surprisingly reluctant to return to her solitary dwelling. Just a few more days, then. Those few days stretched into a week as they fell into a comfortable routine. Quinn would tend his horses in the morning while Eliza prepared breakfast. Afternoons, they would ride into town where Eliza helped prepare the schoolhouse and Quinn conducted his business. Evenings were spent in conversation by the fire, their mutual respect gradually blossoming into something deeper. One night, as they sat side by side watching flames dance in the hearth, Quinn hesitantly asked about her plans. "The school opens in 2 weeks," she replied. "I already have 27 children enrolled. And after that, will you stay in Silver Creek?" There was a careful neutrality in his tone that didn't quite mask his interest in her answer. Eliza considered the question. "I have no reason to return east. My parents made their disappointment clear when I married Thomas against their wishes." She turned to face Quinn directly. "I think I've found something here I never quite had before." "What's that?" "Independence, a sense of purpose." She paused, gathering courage, "and friendship I value more than I can express." Quinn's eyes held her steadily. "Is friendship all you want, Eliza?" The directness of his question startled her, but she appreciated his honesty. I don't know, she admitted. My judgment hasn't proven very reliable when it comes to matters of the heart. Take all the time you need, he replied gently. I'm not going anywhere. The following Sunday, Eliza moved back to her repaired cabin, though she continued to see Quinn regularly. He helped her prepare the schoolhouse, crafting desks and a blackboard frame with the same care he showed in all his work. School opened on a crisp September morning with children from throughout the valley in attendance. Many came from mining families, others from the small farms and ranches that had begun to spring up in the fertile valley. Some rode for hours each way, so determined were their parents that they receive an education. Quinn attended the opening ceremony, standing quietly at the back of the room as Eliza addressed her new pupils. Watching her in her element, confident, passionate about learning, patient with the younger children, he felt a pride that surprised him with its intensity. As autumn progressed, Eliza threw herself into teaching, often working long after her students had departed. Quinn would sometimes arrive at dusk to escort her home, concerned about her walking alone as the days grew shorter. The children are making wonderful progress, she told him one evening as they rode slowly back to her cabin. Even Joseph Miller, who claimed he was too old for schooling at 13, has taken an interest in mathematics. They're lucky to have you, Quinn replied. This valley's changing fast. Those children will need education to navigate the world that's coming. Eliza smiled at his insight. You see further than most, Quinn Westridge. Just practical experience. The frontier won't stay wild forever. He helped her down from his horse when they reached her cabin. Are you still coming to the harvest dance on Saturday? The town had organized a social to celebrate the end of harvest season, an opportunity for scattered families to gather before winter set in. Eliza had agreed to help organize activities for the children. Of course, Mrs. Holloway would never forgive me if I didn't appear to show off the new dress she convinced me to purchase. Quinn nodded, seemingly pleased. I'll come by at 6 to escort you. Saturday evening arrived clear and cool. Eliza found herself spending extra time with her appearance, pinning her chestnut hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical arrangement. The dress Mrs. Holloway had insisted upon was a deep blue that complemented her hazel eyes, more fashionable than anything she'd worn since leaving Boston. When Quinn arrived, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt under his usual vest, the appreciation in his eyes sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the shawl she wore against the evening chill. You look beautiful, he said simply. Thank you. She noticed he'd even polished his boots. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Westridge. The town hall was decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty, lanterns casting a warm glow over the proceedings. A small band of local musicians played lively tunes, while children darted between adults and tables laden with food. After helping organize games for the younger children, Eliza found herself swept into conversations with parents eager to discuss their children's progress. Quinn remained nearby, occasionally bringing her refreshments but giving her space to fulfill her social obligations. As the evening progressed, the music slowed, and couples moved to the center of the room to dance. Quinn approached Eliza, extending his hand in invitation. I'm not much for dancing, he admitted, but I'd be honored if you join me. Eliza placed her hand in his. I'd be delighted. They moved together somewhat awkwardly at first, but soon found a comfortable rhythm. Eliza was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, strong and steady, and the respectful distance he maintained even as other couples danced more closely. I never thanked you properly, she said softly. For what? For the ring. For finding it when you could have easily assumed it was lost forever. Quinn's gaze was earnest. Some things are worth searching for, even when the odds seem impossible. As the music ended, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A man stood in the doorway, swaying slightly, his clothes travel-stained and his expression desperate as he scanned the room. Thomas, Eliza whispered, the blood draining from her face. Her husband's gaze locked onto her, and he pushed his way through the crowd. Eliza, thank God I found you. Quinn's hand tightened protectively around hers, but Eliza stepped forward to confront the man who had abandoned her months before. "What are you doing here, Thomas?" Her voice was steady despite her racing heart. Thomas Ferguson looked thinner than when he'd left, with a haunted quality to his once handsome features. "I've come to take you home," he declared, loud enough for nearby dancers to hear and pause. "I made a terrible mistake. You abandoned me without a penny," Eliza replied coldly. "You're 4 months too late." Thomas reached for her arm, but Quinn stepped between them. "The lady doesn't appear interested in going anywhere with you," he said calmly, though Eliza could sense the tension in his stance. "This is between me and my wife," Thomas sneered, alcohol evident on his breath. "Mind your own business, cowboy. Eliza is my business," Quinn replied evenly. "She's made a life here, one that doesn't include you." Thomas's face darkened with anger. "She's still my wife." "Not for long," Eliza interrupted. "I've filed papers with the territorial court. Given the circumstances of your abandonment, the judge was quite sympathetic." This was true, though Eliza hadn't mentioned it to Quinn. She'd made the journey to the territorial seat 3 weeks earlier, determined to legally free herself from a marriage that existed in name only. Thomas's expression shifted from anger to calculation. "I've struck gold, Eliza," he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "A real vein, not just color. That's why I came back for you. We can be rich together, just like I promised." "I don't believe you," Eliza replied, "and even if it were true, I'm not interested." By now, the entire harvest dance had come to a standstill, the townspeople watching the drama unfold with undisguised interest. Sheriff Miller moved closer, hand resting on his holstered gun in case the confrontation escalated. Thomas noticed the audience and attempted a different approach. "Surely you won't humiliate me in front of all these people," he pleaded. "Let's discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," Eliza said firmly. "Please leave, Thomas. Whatever we had is over." When he still didn't move, Sheriff Miller stepped forward. "You heard the lady. I suggest you find yourself a room at the hotel and sleep off that whiskey. We can talk about your situation in the morning." Thomas glared at Quinn, then at Eliza. "This isn't finished," he muttered, but allowed the sheriff to escort him from the hall. The music slowly resumed, but the festive mood had diminished. Eliza found her hands trembling as the confrontation's adrenaline faded. "Would you like me to take you home?" Quinn asked quietly. She nodded, suddenly eager to escape the curious stares and whispered conversations. They rode in silence through the starlit night, Eliza seated in front of Quinn on his horse, his arms around her providing both physical support and emotional comfort. At her cabin, Quinn built up the fire while Eliza sat at her small table, still processing Thomas's unexpected appearance. "I'm sorry about the dance," she said finally. "You must think me quite the spectacle." Quinn shook his head. "I think you're remarkably brave. Not many would have stood their ground so firmly." "He'll be back tomorrow," Eliza sighed. Thomas never could accept being refused anything. "Would you like me to stay?" Quinn asked. "I could sleep by the fire." The offer was made with such simple decency that tears sprang to Eliza's eyes. "No, but thank you. I need to face him myself. I can't hide behind others forever." Quinn nodded, respecting her decision. "I'll come by in the morning all the same," he said, "to check on things." After he left, Eliza removed her wedding ring from the small box where she kept it. She'd never put it back on after Quinn returned it to her. Now, looking at the simple gold band, she recognized it for what it truly was, a reminder of lessons learned rather than a symbol of enduring love. True to his word, Thomas appeared at her cabin the following morning, more sober but no less determined. Quinn arrived shortly after, ostensibly to deliver firewood, though Eliza suspected his timing was intentional. "I'd like to speak with my wife alone," Thomas said pointedly. Quinn looked to Eliza, who nodded reassuringly. "I'll be fine, thank you for the wood." Once Quinn had departed, though Eliza noted he didn't go far, Thomas launched into an impassioned plea for reconciliation. The gold strike was real, he insisted, showing her a pouch of dust and small nuggets. He'd changed, had stopped drinking, would make everything up to her. "I was a fool to leave," he concluded, "but I've come back for you. We can start fresh." Eliza studied the man she had once pledged her life to. There was genuine desperation in his eyes, but also the same self-serving calculation she'd eventually recognized during their marriage. "No, Thomas," she said quietly but firmly. "You didn't come back for me. You came back because you need someone to cook your meals and wash your clothes while you chase your fortune. If you truly cared for me, you would never have left as you did." Thomas's contrite expression hardened. "It's that cowboy, isn't it? You've been carrying on with him behind my back. Quinn Westridge is a good man who helped me when you abandoned me," Eliza replied, anger rising, "which is more than I can say for you." "He wants what's mine," Thomas snarled. "I was never yours, Thomas." "That was your first mistake, thinking a wife was a possession rather than a partner." Eliza stood straighter, drawing strength from the truth of her words. "The divorce will be final within weeks. I suggest you take your gold and build your new life elsewhere." Thomas reached for her arm, his grip painful. "You're not leaving me, Eliza. I won't allow it." "Remove your hand." Quinn's voice came from the doorway, cold and deadly serious. Thomas spun around, releasing Eliza. "This doesn't concern you." "It does when you put hands on a lady against her will," Quinn replied, stepping into the cabin. He wasn't wearing a gun, but his presence alone carried authority. Thomas looked from Quinn to Eliza, comprehension dawning on his face. "So that's how it is," he said bitterly. "Didn't take you long to find a replacement." "Get out, Thomas," Eliza said wearily. "There's nothing for you here anymore." For a moment, it seemed Thomas might refuse, might escalate the confrontation, but something in Quinn's steady gaze must have convinced him otherwise. "This isn't over," he muttered, pushing past Quinn toward the door. "You'll regret this, Eliza." After Thomas stormed out, Eliza sank into a chair, emotionally drained. Quinn remained standing, giving her space. "Are you all right?" he asked after a moment. She nodded slowly. "I will be." "Thank you for coming back." "I never left," he admitted. "Couldn't bring myself to ride away knowing he was here." Eliza smiled faintly. "Always the protector. Only for those who matter." His voice was soft but filled with meaning. Over the next few days, Thomas made several more attempts to persuade Eliza, alternating between promises of wealth and thinly veiled threats. Each time, she refused him firmly. Quinn kept a watchful distance, respecting her desire to handle the situation herself, but never straying far in case she needed him. Word came from the territorial judge that her divorce would be granted the following week. Thomas, perhaps realizing his cause was lost, disappeared from Silver Creek as suddenly as he had arrived. Some said he'd headed north toward the new strikes in Montana Territory, others that he'd returned to his claim with plans to sell it to Eastern investors. Eliza cared little where he'd gone, only that the shadow he cast over her new life had finally lifted. The school continued to thrive, with more families enrolling their children as word spread of the quality of education offered. The town council voted to provide funding for a proper schoolhouse to be built in the spring. Winter settled over the valley, bringing shorter days and long, cold nights. Quinn took to escorting Eliza home after school, concerned about her walking alone in the snow. Sometimes he would stay for supper, the two of them sharing quiet conversations as wind whistled around the cabin's eaves. On the day her divorce became final, Eliza found Quinn waiting outside the schoolhouse with a small package. "A gift," he explained as they walked toward her cabin. "To mark the occasion." Inside the carefully wrapped parcel was a silver locket, simple but beautifully crafted. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny pressed flower columbine, the first wildflower to bloom in the valley after winter's retreat. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I collected it last spring," Quinn said. "Thought it fitting something that blooms after enduring the harshest season." Eliza touched the delicate bloom with gentle fingers. "Thank you for this and for everything else these past months." Quinn helped her fasten the locket around her neck, his fingers briefly brushing her skin. The contact sent a pleasant warmth through her despite the winter chill. "I've been thinking," he said as they continued walking, "about building a new home. Something larger than my cabin with a proper parlor and extra rooms." "That sounds wonderful," Eliza replied, though she felt an unexpected pang at the thought of him moving farther away. I was hoping you might help me decide where to build it, he continued carefully. Since I'd like it to be a home you would consider sharing someday. Eliza stopped walking, turning to face him in the fading winter light. Quinn Westridge, are you proposing to me? Inelegantly, perhaps, he admitted with a small smile. But yes, I am. I love you, Eliza. I think I have since I pulled you from that river, but I wanted to wait until you were truly free in every sense before asking. She studied his face, this man who had become the center of her world so gradually she'd hardly noticed until this moment. I don't need grand promises or riches, she said softly, just someone who shows up day after day in all the ways that matter. That I can promise, Quinn replied, his voice rough with emotion. Eliza reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. Then yes, I will help you build that home, and yes, I will share it with you. Their wedding took place the following spring, after the snow melted and the columbine began to bloom across the valley. It was a simple ceremony in the new schoolhouse, attended by the entire town. Quinn had indeed begun construction on a new home, situated halfway between his original cabin and town, close enough for Eliza to continue teaching while providing space for the future they both envisioned. On their wedding night, as they stood on the porch of their partially completed home watching stars emerge above the mountains, Quinn presented Eliza with a ring he'd crafted himself, a band of silver set with a small but flawless sapphire that matched her eyes. I thought you might prefer something new, he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. Something that represents beginnings rather than endings. Eliza admired the ring in the moonlight, then reached into her pocket and pulled out her old wedding band, the one the river had taken and Quinn had found in the mud that day. I'd like to bury this, she said, by the riverbank. Not to forget, but to acknowledge that some things must be released before new growth can begin. The following morning, they walked together to a spot overlooking the Colorado River. The spring thaw had swollen its waters again, but the current seemed less threatening now, merely powerful rather than destructive. Eliza knelt and dug a small hole in the soft earth near the bank. Placing the old ring inside, she covered it carefully, then stood and leaned into Quinn's embrace. Thank you for finding it, she said softly, even if only so I could properly let it go. Quinn kissed her temple gently. Sometimes we need to hold something in our hands one last time before we can truly release it. As they turned from the river toward home, Eliza felt a sense of completion. The river had taken her old ring, sweeping away the symbol of promises broken. But it had also carried her to this moment, to this man who understood that she still deserved love, real love, built on respect and trust and daily demonstrations of care. Over the years that followed, Quinn and Eliza's home became the heart of their growing community. The school flourished under Eliza's guidance, eventually expanding to include a small library funded by donations she secured from her former connections in Boston. Quinn's horse breeding business prospered, his animals becoming known throughout the territory for their quality and temperament. Their first child arrived a year after their wedding, a daughter they named Sarah, honoring Quinn's first wife while embracing their new beginning. A son followed 2 years later, then another daughter. Their home rang with children's laughter and the constant flow of visitors, students, and neighbors seeking counsel or simply good conversation. Sometimes, during spring floods, Eliza would stand at their bedroom window watching the river that had once nearly claimed her life. Quinn would often join her, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they observed the water's powerful journey through the valley they now called home. Do you ever regret it? He asked once. Coming west with Thomas, all that happened before. Eliza leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. How can I regret the path that led me here? The river may have taken my ring that day, but it gave me something far more valuable in return. What's that? Quinn asked, though the smile in his voice suggested he already knew her answer. Eliza turned in his arms to face him, the years of shared joy and weathered hardships reflected in her eyes. It brought me to the man who would teach me what love truly means, not in grand gestures or pretty words, but in mud-stained hands holding out a tarnished ring and saying I deserved better. Quinn kissed her then, as tenderly as he had on their wedding day. Outside, the river continued its eternal journey, carving new paths through the landscape just as they had forged their own way together, one day, one choice, one act of love at a time. 20 years after that fateful day when the bridge collapsed, Silver Creek had grown into a proper town with a train station, several churches, and streets lined with businesses. Quinn and Eliza Westridge remained respected fixtures in the community, their partnership a model many younger couples aspired to emulate. On their 20th anniversary, they returned to the spot where they had buried Eliza's old ring. The riverbank had shifted over the decades, the water carving a slightly different path through the valley, but the old cottonwood that had marked the location still stood sentinel over the flowing waters. It's somewhere out there now, Eliza mused, gesturing toward the river. Carried away again. Quinn took her hand, running his thumb over the sapphire ring he'd given her, now accompanied by a simple band that commemorated 2 decades of marriage. Some things aren't meant to stay buried forever, he said, but some bonds only grow stronger with time. Eliza smiled up at her husband, the years having etched fine lines around his eyes but done nothing to diminish the steadfast love in his gaze. Like ours, she agreed, and together they turned toward home, leaving the river to continue its eternal journey while they walked hand in hand into the future they had built together.